So the disciples had just come down the mountain. And something amazing had happened on that mountain. We know it as the Transfiguration. Something mystical happened. And it revealed to the disciples, perhaps even to Jesus himself, that he was far more than just a prophet. With that mountaintop glow, Jesus and Peter and James and John, they encounter a crowd. And a father pushes forward and he pleads with Jesus to heal his only son. It seems that while he's up on the mountain, the father had pleaded with Jesus' other disciples to heal his son, but they could not. And that's when Jesus exploded. "You faithless and perverse generation," is just spat out from his lips. It's very un-Jesus-like. Was he just exhausted? And who really was he speaking to? Who was he frustrated with? Who was the object of that spiel? Was it the father who had the unfortunate audacity to ask Jesus to do what Jesus had been doing for so many all throughout Galilee? Was it a mere generalized exasperation with humanity? Or was it a point of frustration with his own disciples, whom he had just earlier in the text, it's at the beginning of chapter 9, just earlier Jesus had given authority to his disciples to cast out demons, to proclaim the kingdom, and to heal. And yet they could not. How much longer must I be with you and bear with you? But then Jesus did the thing. He cast out the demon that was mauling the Father's only Son, and the crowd, of course, went wild. But Jesus turned towards his disciples and he said, "Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands." Now, the Son of Man, as we've been following all through the summer, is an end times figure from the book of Daniel. He comes, the Son of Man, comes to set the world right, and is specially anointed and animated and energized by Yahweh to bring, in the words of the Lord's Prayer, "Thy kingdom on earth as in heaven." The Son of Man is what the disciples had just witnessed in that marvelous transfiguration on the mountain, seeing Jesus for who he was. The Son of Man is who Jesus thought he was, that he constantly referred to himself as. Jesus is telling his disciples that the Son of Man, the real hope of the world, the Son of Man, that is Jesus himself, is going to be betrayed. But the disciples are completely dense to what he is talking about. I mean, the disciples were awestruck by Jesus. I mean, he was the man. And they had just had this amazing experience that confirmed that Jesus was a step ahead and a step above. And in your own life, you might think about times you have been awestruck by someone else. Maybe a celebrity comes into your life. Imagine, I mean, seriously, what we would do individually and as a community if Michelle Obama walked into our congregation. I mean, we would be the coolest kids in all of Kirkland. About 35 years ago, I was in seminary and I was working in a Chicago bookstore. And in comes Oprah Winfrey. And she was famous, even then, so long ago. And all of us clerks were aglow. And we were full of willingness, falling all over ourselves to serve her every need. Even edging, it's almost like basketball. So even edging each other out to get her attention. Puppies just jumping up and down. For the disciples, Jesus was that superstar. So what's this weird being betrayed thing all about? In Wednesday morning Bible study, I'm rather fond of saying, how would this text preach? What would you say to the congregation if you were going to preach this text? Now, the problem of this story in particular is that the description of the boy who's being mauled by a spirit, shrieking and falling into convulsions, sounds an awful lot like epilepsy to me. Should I preach on exorcising demons the next time you see someone fall into the trauma of a seizure? The text has been preached that way before. Basically, casting out demons isn't that helpful for most of us. But I do think this particular text can help us understand a different kind of demon. And I would ask that you would stretch your imagination, and it requires that. Stretch your imagination a bit and say that the boy in the story is actually the church, the capital C church. There's an unclean spirit in the church, a spirit of destruction that causes Christians to lose their minds, to shriek, to fall into convulsions, to foam at the mouth. In other words, there's this destructive spirit, a demon, that is hurting the church, threatening its life, causing it trauma and suffering, causing terror and great fear. A demon that has so polluted and fouled up the core message that the church proclaims, that Christ has become anti-Christ. And we can't cast it out. We don't know how. 50 years ago, this month, in August of 1971, future Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell wrote a very confidential memo to the National Chamber of Commerce. Powell was worried that too much democracy was breaking out. Again, think back to the context. We're coming out of the 60s with all the disruption, all the change that was happening in America. Powell was worried about the implications of Ralph Nader's consumer rights movement, of the environmental movement, the anti-war movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, the civil rights movement. The elites articulated in this memo were worried about the diminishment of their own power and control over society. They felt that they were losing control. Now you can Google this. I sent it out in WhatsApp on Friday. You can Google the Powell memo. It's actually pretty easy to read. It's long, but understandable. What he outlined was an aspirational vision that essentially called upon big corporate money to organize itself against this outburst of democracy. Big corporate money needed to seize control over the intellectual, artistic, cultural, and political levels of influence. In other words, business people, stop thinking about your business and start thinking about the culture in which we live. Begin to target your funds towards control over those various sections of society. Big money needed to mount an aggressive assault so that it could shape American democracy to serve its interests. And from Powell's vision came this explosion of right-wing think tanks that began to write legislative and judicial policy. Money became very targeted towards specific candidates rather than, shelling money out for just about everybody. Academia began to see more Federalist chairs endowed. And this is my point, and a bit out of sight, a major sustained outpouring of funds funneled into organizations like the Institute on Religion and Democracy, whose purpose was to undermine and eviscerate the social justice proclamation of the gospel. The first religious strategy was to create wedge issues, that would tear the church into warring factions. Abortion, which was not a big issue, became the litmus test of Christian faithfulness, and sexuality issues followed. Today, the anti is increasing with the rise of the irrational, anti-masking, anti-vaccines, climate change denial, COVID denial. Increasingly, there is a linkage that is defining Christianity, the gospel, with the policy objectives of far-right extremes, mostly rooted in the Republican Party. Anti-tax, anti-government, anti-pluralism, anti-regulations, pro-authoritarianism, pro-privatized wealth accumulation. And this has produced shrieking and convulsions and foaming at the mouth throughout the capital C Christian movement. Big money, organized money, understands that the gospel of Jesus Christ is an anti-empire, anti-domination, anti-Pharaoh movement. It understands that the subversive memory of Jesus includes what we've been talking about all summer: good news to the poor, sight to the blind, liberation of the oppressed, freedom to the captives, and this robust proclamation of the Jubilee, God's kingdom come on earth as in heaven, a Jubilee that cancels debt, that releases slaves and gives them resources to begin again. We call it reparations. And that offers Sabbath rest for the land and all its creatures, that redistributes wealth so that both generational poverty and aristocratic wealth are eliminated from society. You can feel the threat in that. That's the core of Jesus' message. Organized money knows that the example of Jesus is an existential and moral threat to its existence, because religion has the power to organize people against the organization of money. Hence Powell's fear of democracy movements. Hence the fear that is fueling our massive political and religious confusion today. Just like the boy who was seized by a demon, so today the capital C church is being mauled and convulsed by this demonic frenzy of a Christian nationalism that is being massively funded by corporate money, by oligarchic money, by the organization of money and its anti-democracy interests. Whether we're talking about inclusivity or tradition, whether we're looking at a major restructuring of taxes or protecting the wealth of corporations, whether we're using government to assist the middle and working class or using propaganda to divide people into class and racial conflict, whether we're talking about a multicultural, pluralist culture or a commitment to white supremacy as the norm, if you pull the curtain back just a little, and take a peek, you will see pretty quickly and easily the massive interests of the organization of big money that is working rigorously to silence the social justice teachings of Jesus. You'll see the outlandish outpouring of multiple millions of dollars that are funding Christian organizations and pastors to subvert the fundamental message of Jesus Christ. Good news to the poor, sight to the blind, liberation of the oppressed, release for the captive, a commitment to a Jubilee vision of economic justice. You'll see that great wealth is funding the infrastructure that is undermining and distorting the message and ministry of Jesus. The Son of Man is being betrayed into human hands. When you look at pictures of the January 6th insurrection, you'll see Jesus front and center. When you listen to politicians who lead the charge of anti-masking, anti-climate change, of anti-tax, when you listen to their followers, you will inevitably hear Christian justifications such as this quote I just picked up today. The Bible guarantees my freedom and yours and our children's to breathe oxygen. When you probe into vigilante groups like the Proud Boys, you'll discover, much like the old Ku Klux Klan, they are animated through Christian rhetoric. But it's no Jesus that we encounter in the Bible. It's no Jesus from the Gospel of Luke. Remember the beginning of Jesus' ministry? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, sight to the blind. You'll hear the name Jesus. You'll see preachers front and center. You'll witness fervent, zealous Christians. But it's no biblical Jesus. It's an anti-Jesus. It's a holy war Jesus. It's a crusader Jesus. It's a Jesus who has been betrayed into human hands by those who are possessed by a spirit of resentment, of domination, of violence, and of an inflated, narcissistic self-righteousness. Which is why it's so impenetrable to have a conversation. And we have seen this demon before. This isn't new. It's just new for us. It's the same spirituality that guided Christian massacres of Muslims and Jews in the Crusades. It's the same spirituality that justified Christian ethnic cleansing against Native Americans and that promoted Christian enslavement of Africans in our own history. This isn't the first time that the Son of Man has been betrayed into human hands. Nor is it the first time that those who are pulling the strings are agents of the organization of big money, who for the last 50 years have ignored that God is just and that God sees and acts in history. They've shuffled multiple millions of dollars to tear the church apart, to crucify Jesus again, and to turn the name of Jesus into the shame of Antichrist. Let these words sink into your ears, says Jesus. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands, but the disciples don't comprehend what he's saying. I mean, they've just seen the vision on the mountaintop. Jesus knew this. He knew how easily his hard teachings, and they are hard, could become an antichrist spirituality. So he took a child, and he put a child in their midst. I mean, these were the disciples who were just talking about which one of them is going to be the greatest. A child in that culture was a nobody. They had no rights. They had no voice. They had no significance. Jesus, with this child, says to his disciple, "Whoever welcomes this child welcomes me and the one who has sent me, for the least significant among you, the least worthy among you, the least esteemed among you is the greatest." That's how to cast out the demon of an antichrist spirituality. Who cares for the least? Who is in solidarity with the poor and the homeless and the unemployed and the mentally ill? Who speaks up for the civil rights of the earth, of the mountains and the streams and the air? Who dares to think about the 7th generation from now and to act in such a way that their life is prioritized, is valued? Who welcomes the immigrant, welcomes the transgendered, welcomes the multicolors of God's rainbow? Who builds bridges of reconciliation and friendship? Who renounces power and privilege and fame and wealth and domination and instead embraces the humility of enough? We have enough. and the gentleness of hospitality. This teaching ends with John, who has seen Jesus transfigured and yet doesn't comprehend Jesus' warning about the Son of Man. Jesus, this close friend of Jesus, sees others, those who aren't following Jesus. In our context, maybe it's people of other faiths. Maybe it's atheists. Maybe it's folks that, for whatever reason, we judge as not quite good enough, kind of unclean, suspicious. John sees that they can cast out demons, that they can do the work of Jesus. And he asks, should we stop them? They didn't pass the test. Should we stop them? But Jesus gives us another insight into resisting Antichrist spirituality. Do not stop them, for whoever is not against you is for you. In other words, build alliances. Partner with those who share the values of Jesus' teachings. Welcome the excluded. Build partnerships with those of similar values. Organize people. In a time of the demonic frenzy of Christian nationalism, of an antichrist spirituality, in a time such as this, start there. Welcome the excluded. Build partnerships. Organize people. And let God do what God does best. Using your own faith, your own hope, your own love, God can make a way when there is no way. God can even bring life out of death. Amen.